Aye. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to you, Chief Constable, and your team to this March meeting. A special welcome today to our new political members joining us at the board table following changes arising from the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Cal, Cheryl, Owen and Keith, you're all very welcome. And a second time room for you, Keith, as well. Also on your team, Chief, there have been some changes with the retirement of ACC McCoon, and which you will want to mention. On behalf of the board, I would wish to place on record our thanks to him for his contribution to policing throughout his service in a range of posts. We have, of course, begun discussions with you on substantively filling a number of vacancies within the team and the timescales for that. Since our last meeting in February, we have some progress in that following restoration of the Assembly. Additional funding has been made for policing to bridge the 60 million gap, and the Justice Minister has indicated that police pay arrangements will be progressed. We're still, of course, in discussion around the resourcing levels generally and specifically in terms of police officer numbers. Thank you for sharing the findings from a report you commissioned around police numbers. This adds to the discussion and evidence in support of the case, and we will continue to work with you on this. We are, of course, still in a difficult position around recruitment without a confirmed budget for the year ahead, and we share your desire that numbers cannot fall any further. And that means we need to move to stop the decline. We also must do all we can to make sure resources we have are used to best effect and that we support those delivering the service. It is shocking that 8 officers per day are injured in the course of their duty. The board called for tougher sentences for those who attack police and other emergency service workers, and we welcome the commitment of the Justice Minister to bring forward legislation to address this. Officers also need to be properly supported. So how we do that is very much a live issue. And one that we will continue to keep under review. You may also wish to comment on the announcement by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland yesterday that the Northern Ireland terrorism threat has been reduced from severe to substantial. Tomorrow, PSNI will publish the interim report on Operation Canova. As a board, we want to discuss the findings and implications of the report in slower time, alongside upcoming issues regarding handling of legacy cases as the new legislation comes into effect. There has also been a number of issues regarding disclosure and legacy and some other court and tribunal cases that have raised serious concern. So there are questions on this today. So we can move to opening remarks on your report, Chief Constable.
Thank you very much, Chair. And also I welcome new members to the board. And I think it's your last meeting as Chair today.
It is.
So I'd just like to say on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much for taking that position. And all the work that you've done. The only mistake you made was probably selecting me, but other than that, I think you've been exemplary. So thanks for the support of PSNI, Deirdre, and good luck with everything you do in the future. So thank you. Right, opening remarks. I do want to take the board to my forward, and I want to expand on a few things before we go to questions. So firstly, I echo your sentiments around the restoration of the Northern Ireland Executive. To have Stormont back up and running is really, really great. Since my appointment, I've been consistent and very clear around the consequences of the funding of the PSNI. And this morning, I want to set out some of the stark realities of that position. And I think it's incumbent on me and the board and the Justice Minister and the First and Deputy First Minister. Indeed, I would suggest all parties across public services to recognise and seek to assist to address the funding position of the PSNI. Also, of course, I'm delighted that the funding that has been allocated as a result of the restoration of the Assembly allows for the outstanding pay awards for officers and staff. Of course, it does not extend to any pay with regards to next year and any budget for next year. And we're all alive to the incredible financial challenges that we are facing to sustain services and also to ensure that we can pay our officers and staff properly. I've made it very clear, and I'm absolutely resolute, that officers and staff deserve their pay awards. I consider it non-negotiable. And I've written to the Justice Minister to confirm my intention to introduce it. Interestingly, and some of this is in the report that I'll reference shortly, but the Office of National Statistics data shows that since 2010, spending on public order and safety in Northern Ireland has risen by 8%, demonstrating with that small increase the real financial problems facing the justice sector. However, over the same period, the PS9 budget has actually fallen. So we were just above 900 million and we're now below 900 million. This seems to point to policing losing out significantly within the justice family, notwithstanding the wider public services and the budgets that they receive. So in the same period, the health budget has increased from 3.5 billion to 6.6 billion. That is an increase of 89%. And the education budget has increased from 2.7 billion to 3.4 billion. That is an increase of 23%. I am a huge supporter of health. And I recognise the immense work that health professionals and the National Health Service do for all of us. But we are becoming the support function for health, and we'll talk about that this morning. I say this with slight tongue in cheek, but perhaps if we change the name from the Police Service of Northern Ireland to the Police and Health Service of Northern Ireland, we might get some access to some wider budgets. But we are the indemnity, we are the insurance policy for health, and I'll talk about that shortly. I've signalled my intention to stop the reduction in police officer numbers by restarting student officer recruitment, which begins in April. The final attestation ceremony is to be held until those recruits go through the process, which will be in October, was held recently in February of a small number of officers who'd worked tremendously hard to get through the training process. And I was delighted of the support that they received from all political parties. As you have referenced in your opening, I commissioned some consultants, Leapwise, a firm experienced in supporting strategic planning and budget decisions in policing, to provide an assessment of our officer and staff numbers. And I just want to mention a couple of things in that report as part of my opening. Firstly, as with everybody who comes here, and I spoke to the pay review board yesterday, who were incredibly taken, uniquely so, by a visit they did to Derry and Strabane and the lived experiences of police officers with regards to their pay, the threat and the demand that they face. And it was described to me as unique to any other organisation in policing in the United Kingdom. And they are concerned about the pay and conditions for those officers. The report by Leapwise, who have worked with 14 other police forces and 5 national policing bodies, provided a contextual analysis with regards to understanding the PS9's financial performance and delivery of services. It did a top-down analysis of the PS9's resource requirements and more of a bottom-up analysis of officer and staff requirements. They tested their work with chief officers elsewhere in the UK who had experience of both working and not working in the PS9 to provide further reassurance around the accuracy of the work. Obviously, they went back to the original and often referred to Lord Patton report, his report, the Independent Commission on Policing in Northern Ireland of 1999, which provided that peace, as long as the peace process did not collapse and the security situation did not deteriorate significantly, the situation with regards to the number of police officers that were required for the then 10 years from then into 1999 was 7,500 full-time officers. So that was a prediction for 10 years on the basis of a peaceful place. It's important then to look at the context of where we are now in Northern Ireland and the threat level that we've experienced, which you mentioned, Chair, came down this week. But the threat level has been at severe effectively since 2010. It came down to substantial for a period of 22-23, and I welcome that it's come down again. But that doesn't change the operating practices at this time of the PSNI and the work that we have to do to keep people safe from national security threats. This is a unique place with regards to policing in the United Kingdom. We are the glue that holds the Good Friday Agreement in place. And we need to be a service that's capable of attracting and sustaining support from the community as a whole. The service, in real terms, we have lost 22% of our staffing levels. 22% of our staffing levels in police officers. That is not sustainable. The report highlights that the PSNI has experienced the largest expenditure reduction in all of UK police forces since 2010. Now, these are hard headlines, but they're headlines that we all need to be aware of. Our overtime budget of £31 million is 1.5 to 2 times higher than English forces, and yet we are commended for the rigour and the governance around making sure that our overtime is extremely strictly managed. But we have to use that overtime so we can deliver our policing services. Our sickness levels have risen significantly, and they're double what sickness levels are in forces in England and Wales. And staff morale last year, particularly, as you know, considerably faltered. The report talks about the early signs of performance challenges because of the numbers. The HMIC FRS inspection report graded us as good, but did highlight the concerns that they predicted with regards to our numbers in retaining that performance. We've also had exemplary reports and supportive reports from the IRC, the Independent Reporting Commission, and also the Northern Affairs Committee around our activity around paramilitaries and serious and organised crime. But both of those groups provide signposts around the difficulties of this organisation managing to maintain the performance that it has so far because of the budgetary challenges that we face. The key findings of the report, and this is the headline for me, is that if the PSNI resourcing had kept pace with England, Wales and Scotland since 2010, we would have between 8,005 and 8,540 officers. And we'd have between 2,464 and 3,018 police staff. As I said, between 2010 and 2023, police officer numbers fell to 6,730, a 22% real terms reduction in officers. This is when shifts in England, Wales and Scotland saw nowhere near those sorts of levels of reductions. In fact, there's been significant growth in policing in England and Wales. So the conclusions of the report, and I'm conscious of time, set out that first, that police resourcing in PSNI has not kept pace with other forces across the United Kingdom. If it had done, we would have in excess of 8,000 police officers, rather than the 6,400 or so that we have today. Secondly, that there are clear evidence reasons why the officer and staff requirement in Northern Ireland is considerably above all other parts of the United Kingdom. So they found that Northern Ireland would require an estimated additional officer requirement on the basis of that additional responsibilities that we carry, national threats, legacy. We're an armed force, our estate is fortified, threats against our officers are between 1,594 and 2,487 officers. An additional staff requirement of between 404 and 495. Now, that is quite dramatic reading. We've had verification of the report, and I continue to seek further verification of the report, forgive me. But I just think that that landscape of where we currently are needs to be made known to everybody, because we need and we must address it. Now, I said I'd talk a little bit about health. So on average, we do around about 500 ambulance calls a month where the ambulance service cannot respond to calls for service. In a period from the 1st of January 2023 to the 14th of April 2023, we spent approximately 4,550 hours in hospitals with people in mental health crisis. Between the 1st of March 2023 and the 1st of March 2024, we dealt with 21,425 calls relating to mental health. Our systems, by the way, aren't set up to recover this data, so these are really conservative figures. This is the tip of the iceberg. There's an example in my forward where our armed response officers managed to look after an elderly lady who was in crisis and they simply couldn't get an ambulance time to go and help her. And when we spoke to a paramedic, they said nobody's coming to help. So we removed her in an armoured Land Rover with her daughter. These are day-to-day examples. I'm not going to go through it, but it's in the introduction. It's getting to a position where if we don't get the support that we need, we'll be having some really difficult conversations about what we are and what we are not able to do. To that end, we've made the difficult decision to reduce a number of station inquiry officers from 28 to 17. The impact of this is not lost on me, but the affordability is the driving factor. The assessment I've given you clearly sets out that we've got considerable challenges, and that will include in our national security responsibilities. Neighbourhood policing, which everybody knows, is a core component. It is the underlying principle of British policing, will continue to shrink, inevitably being subsumed into critical areas of business such as response policing. Response policing, when people call 999, we need to answer their call and we need to respond to their call. In the period that I've talked about with regards to funding and other public services in Northern Ireland, and we did a very, very productive crime conference with Angana Shikana last week. But in the last 3 years alone, the Garda budget has gone up 23%. And what I heard from officers last week was that years ago, Guards would look north with envy at the professionalism, the numbers, the equipment that the PSNI would be able to provide to make sure that society was kept safe. And now they realise just what an acute position we're in, and we cannot match them for the stuff that we need to do with them. So, the situation is pretty serious. I also quickly want to mention assaults, and I'm grateful, Chair, that you did. An assault on an officer is absolutely unacceptable. During one 24-hour period in February, 25 police officers were assaulted whilst performing their duties. The work that these officers carry out day to day is so key. A lot of this involves mental health crises, as I've explained, but any assault against these individuals, our police officers or staff, is unacceptable. Over 5,600 assaults in 4 years were reported. 5,600 assaults in 4 years. 68% of officers from response policing, 52% of officers from neighbourhood policing, and 51% of district support teams, and indeed 82% of custody detention officers surveyed reported having been assaulted. Despite all these challenges, I have to tell you day to day, the positive stories of what the men and women of the PSNI are doing is inspirational and exemplary. How we are managing to do what we are doing with what we've got is quite extraordinary, and we will continue to do it. But I've mentioned the term tipping point, and I think tipping point is exactly where we are. So I would appeal to anybody and everybody who listens to the data, reads the report from Leapwise, understands the challenges that we're facing, conscious of the incredible difficulties facing other public services and the amount of funding provided to Northern Ireland, but recognises the need for policing to be invested in. And we do know that money that is allocated for policing to come to Northern Ireland is not provided to policing, it goes elsewhere. Well, that position has got to stop in the future. So, with that, I will pause for questions.
Okay, thank you, Chief Constable. I'm going to go across the board to my colleagues. The first question is from Peter Osborne on a question on budget and officer numbers.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, it's really continuing on, I suppose, from what is the thrust of your introductory comments so far around affordability, police numbers and the delivery of service to the public. I would just like, if possible, to ask three related questions on that. You talked about budget coming here, going elsewhere. Could you expand on that a little bit, what you meant by that? The HMIC report talks about budget and talks about 3-year planning. How much progress has been made in looking to implement that recommendation over the last number of weeks since our last meeting? You touched on the pay award for this year, but maybe not for next year. Can you just clarify what you meant by that? Because that has implication, I suppose, for officers and others. And the final question on it is the police college and the capacity of the police college. If there is an ability to increase officer numbers, you talked about 1,500 to 2,500. Does the college have that capacity? And what sort of implementation or support the officers as they go through training is required additional to what is there at the moment?
Just repeat question 2 for me, Pim.
That's a test of my memory, but I think I think question 2 was around the budget and the potential for 3-year budgeting that the HMIC report recommended for the PSNI.
Thank you. Right. So there were 4, I think, but the first one was the Barnet consequential. So when we received the block budget in Northern Ireland from Westminster, there is an allocation of funding calculated on budget allocation to Policing England and Wales for us. That is part of a sum of money that comes to here. The Assembly then makes a decision on where that money goes. So money that is in that block budget for policing doesn't necessarily then come to policing. It's diverted into other public services. So we actually need additional investment to that, but we at the very least need to get the funding that is allocated as part of the block budget for policing to come to policing. And I will branch off very briefly. The list of things that we have to do never gets less, it only ever gets more. And I have huge sympathy for our colleagues in health, but as they struggle, as they are find it more challenging to provide out of hours support, as they find it more difficult to provide weekend support, the option of last resort for many people is policing. So our demand in that health space goes up considerably. And of course, one thing I didn't mention before, which I should make clear, we shouldn't be, for all those hours that we sit with people in mental health crisis, for all those ambulance calls that we cover, we aren't trained to do these things. So the example that I gave in my introduction about the lady with the broken pelvis, we are not trained to the level to deal with these issues. And it's extraordinary to watch young officers especially have the patience, the empathy and the care that they do with people going through crises that we can only begin to imagine. But that's not what we are, that's not what we're here for. So there is something about us getting the money that we should get from the block grant, and there's a second issue about getting the money because we've not been invested in over and above that colleagues in England, Wales and Scotland and the Garda have received to different levels that we haven't. And everybody talks about the unique challenges here. I talked about the threat level. I'm delighted it's gone down, but these things, as we know, go up and down. That threat level going down doesn't change how safe our officers feel, doesn't change the fact they've got to check under their cars. And if we're not going to fund in those officers, we're going to lose more and more to sickness and our performance is going to deteriorate. And we won't become an employer of choice. This is a vocational job, but let's at least give them the right pay and let's give them the right numbers. Your second question, I think, was about how we can try to influence matters so that we get 3-year budget settlements, that we can build in pay awards. I'm speaking to all of the people in positions of authority, whether that's the Secretary of State, the Justice Minister, the First and Deputy First Minister, Westminster. You know, we're going to have an election later this year. I've been speaking to the Labour Party about the need for a more sensible approach to how an organisation of almost £1 billion is funded, so that we can actually plan. We can plan for interventions that we do with community groups. We can plan for the paramilitary crime task force and resourcing. We can plan for neighbourhoods because we get in-year budgets. And I think that goes to the next question, which is about next year's funding and next year's funding of the pay award. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think of the over £70 million Justice has received, probably around 60 million is earmarked for the PSNI for our gap around pay award, or partly around pay award. This is the same for all public services, and this is the challenge for everybody here. There is no such provision for next year. There is no such provision for next year. Now, I don't know the legals on this, but you can't pay a pay award 1 year and then take it away the next. I mean, this is crazy. So that is something that I know each of the ministers will be, you know, wrestling with. What do they do? There was some information that I read this morning that I think Justice has got a 440 odd million gap for next year that I read. We're obviously part of that gap. So, you know, I know there was obviously the budget yesterday in London. We've got to make sure that our voice is heard in addressing the gaps of funding for the public services here, but especially in light of the evidence of what's happened since 2010, we've got to recover the position for the PSNI. Finally, around the college tell me that they can only bring in around about 350 recruits a year as we're currently structured for. I'm looking for other ways to bring in recruitment through direct detective recruitment, which is that's been worked very successfully in England, Wales, and Scotland. How we can bring in transferees from other forces that will add to the numbers, so we can sort of bring in additional numbers, and how we can actually move the dial on the 350 up. There is a small table in the document that I shared with the board this morning that gives you a sense of how we could uplift some numbers, but I'm looking to put more challenge into that. Interesting though, even the additional staff we need to put in the college, we'll have to take out of places like neighbourhoods, because these are neighbourhood officers that we'll have to bring into the college. We robbed Peter to pay Paul. And this is because of a sustained period of underfunding of this organisation, which, you know, I try to be very politically correct, but I'm not going to accept this, and I'm going to keep calling it out politely, but very clearly. So we're looking at ways to, if we did get the money, to ensure that we could deliver that recruitment. Okay.
Great. Thank you. I have a supplemental from Nuala on this.
Thank you, Chief, for your response so far. And I just have a quick question then. From your answer then, is it your assessment that single year budgets are actually hindering the process, and that you as Chief Constable would support multi-year budgets for the entirety of the executive so that your service could avail of it too?
Yeah, so we can plan. We can financially plan. You know, an organisation of the numbers that we have, of the statutory responsibilities we have around keeping people safe, my accounting officer role, all of that, so that we can plan properly. So I would very much support that.
Okay, thank you. Mike, you wanted to come in quickly here?
Yeah, your comments about allocating bonus consequentials would be deeply repercussive. Are you saying you would support that for health, education, every other section of government? And are you aware, has the police or justice ever benefited from a Barnett consequential arising from an initiative from health, education, or another area of government?
So I can't answer the second question, Mike. I don't know of that since I've been here. Sorry? Well, I'll bring Pamela in if I could in a minute. So I don't know the answer to the second question, but I'm sure we could find out. Listen, I think if we take this down to the simple facts that if whatever money should be allocated to the organisation, we've clearly lost out on this. I think it's a good starting point. And when you add into policing in Northern Ireland is seen as uniquely challenging, rather than lose some of that money for policing, one assumes we would have got more money for policing, but that's not what's happened. What I don't want to do, I really don't want to do, is disadvantage any of the other public services that I know have real and immediate challenges. But I'm the Chief Constable of PSNI, and we are doing a lot of work, a lot of our demand, and we're talking significant levels of our demand now isn't the traditional crime. We are safeguarding, we're looking after vulnerable people, we're looking after people in mental health crisis. We're triaging that until mental health professionals can pick it up, but we're not funded for that. So that's the position I'm trying to make clear. But can I bring Pamela in on the second question?
I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm just thinking of the time on the question to go through. Could we get maybe a written response on that, if that's okay? Thank you, Mike. Les, the question on IPT and some supplementals from Michael, Linda and Nuala.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, I want to ask you about the surveillance of lawyers and journalists. We've received a frankly unsatisfactory response to date on the request for a report on the extent of applications and authorizations of the surveillance of journalists and lawyers. To be clear, the information the board is seeking is completely unrelated to and separate from the current Investigatory Powers Tribunal around surveillance of two particular journalists. So on that basis, could the board get an effective response? And given that we've been waiting for over 6 months, can you give us a time frame to meet that request? Thanks.
Thank you, Les. So interesting, the part of your question about the information the board is seeking is separate to the current IPT tribunal. But let me just try and pick my way through this. And certainly what I can say, and I think people understand me well enough now at the board, there will be, I invite scrutiny, there will be a disclosure of the information you want. So you need to understand that will happen. So that's the headline. But I think the board wrote to us, and I've seen the letter now, in September, the 15th of September, 2023, wrote to DCC Mark Hamilton. That letter was given to Chris to my left, Chris Todd, when he became the temporary Deputy Chief Constable in November. And I apologise for that, but Chris didn't get that until November. Because of the tribunal, the IPT tribunal that was due to take place last week, there was a decision taken, and I know there was consultation with the human rights lawyer that advises the board, that we will wait until after the tribunal to provide a written answer to the board. Now, the tribunal last week was adjourned until I think a date in October. I want to assure you that the written answer to your question that was shared, as I understand it, with the human rights advisor to the board, and that he was allowed to see it, but it wasn't given to him, is that we're going to deconflict with the IPT. I've already commissioned this to make sure we can provide you with that information so we don't get into trouble with the IPT. But we will give you the information that I think you asked for up to 2018, but also up to current dates of any information around any applications, such as you've asked, around journalists or lawyers. Okay. What I can assure you of is that since I have been Chief Constable in October, if this is helpful, there haven't been any such applications and you'll know my background as head of covert policing, undercover policing. I am especially interested in this area that we act with full propriety, and I'm not saying we haven't in the past, but there haven't been any applications. So there is no, if you like, industrial application of such powers to look at journalists or lawyers or indeed NGOs. There's been nothing of the such like since I've arrived. I've seen nothing, but we will answer your questions in full. And I would hope I will give the IPT, with great respect to them, of course, and the three judges, a time frame that I want to answer that question by. So I'd hope to get that to you within 4 weeks at most, but I'll give them opportunity to see what we're going to say and it doesn't conflict with the proceedings, which I do not think it does, by the way. So I think we can give you that information.
Les?
Thanks, John. I mean, just to make the point that the purpose of our human rights advisor is to be reassured or otherwise, and then to provide us with reassurance or otherwise. So we are relying on you being open and transparent with him to allow him to give us the reassurance we need. And some of this is about both reality and perception. And when it takes a considerable period of time to do that piece of work that we think is important, that doesn't give us the kind of reassurance we need. So a timely response is important, and then we can take it from there. And we have obviously powers that we can look to require this, but frankly, we rely on that relationship working in practice, and that has to be based on trust and openness. So I'm hoping that we can do this in that particular way rather than in a much more formal way, frankly.
Okay.
So you won't need to refer to any powers that, you know, we are, I looked at the pattern report recently, and there's a recommendation in there you might all remember about the PSNI should be an organisation that provides information in the public interest. It doesn't retain information in the police interest. It was very interesting wording, and that's at the core of who I am and the people around me. And I met Sir Brian Leveson, as you probably know, in February. He knows of me, I know of him from the work we've done in the past. And I know he wrote to the board in November, and he did provide reassurance to the board that the IPCO inspectors had reviewed the IPCO inspection reports that they'd done. And obviously IPCO came in after some of the period of the data that I know you're after, Les. But since IPCO has been in place, examining the reports, and they'd not identified any reference to concerns regarding the acquisition of journalist communications data by the PSNI. And he comments in the letter that he understood these reports are routinely shared by us with the Northern Ireland Board Human Rights Advisor, and we will share all such reports with the Human Rights Advisor to the board. So just for some additional reassurance. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chief Constable. I'm going to move on to some supplementals on this from Mike, Linda and Nuala. So Mike.
Chair, thank you. And Chair, like the Chief Constable, I'm keen that we do not air a single detail of the ongoing current IPT case. So my interest is more in terms of how the PSNI engages with the IPT, and I'm thinking of December 2022 when they came here to Belfast, and in common parlance, the PSNI settled on the steps of the courthouse. And then most recently, the lodging of hundreds of pages of fresh information at the last minute. And my question is this: is that consistent with the 7 principles of public life, including openness and treating others with respect?
So only because of the importance of not straying into IPT territory, but I am going to say something in answer to your question, which otherwise I would say I probably can't speak because of the process. The delay last week was not because of the PSNI, and that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to stray into territory. So there should be no, and I would like to deal with this and arrest any concern about the PSNI causing the delay last week. There was no delay because of a failure to submit information from this organisation. And I will leave it at that. There was a closed session and there was an open session. And from comments made, I'm satisfied by the court that we've done everything that was required of us. And I think we need to leave it there, and it will see its way through in October, if that's okay.
Okay, okay, thank you. Linda? No, you're okay? Yeah. Nuala? No, we're okay. It must be all answered. Okay, going on to question 3 from Keith on the question on assaults on police officers.
Okay, thank you, Chief Constable. I read in your report, obviously, earlier and regarding the appalling number of officers attacked and assaulted, and obviously reference from the chair and yourself earlier. So 3 points to my one question, or 3 questions in one, whatever way you want to look at that. In your survey, can you define what you refer to as an assault, and do you categorize these, and who carries out that assault, whether it's a mental health case or what? So in other words, categorizing the type of assaults. The Injury and Assault Reduction Strategy Working Group, can you develop on the possible recommendations? And finally, what are your statistics like in the PSNI with respect to other forces in the UK or indeed anywhere else in the world? Whether the same number of officers or not. So in other words, how are we performing here? Unfortunately, getting too many assaults, and how's that shaping up elsewhere?
So to accurately respond to your question, I think I'm going to have to write to you about if you like, the questions that are asked of our officers around the survey. I haven't got the survey with me. If I get the questions in advance, that can be helpful. But I will provide you with the questions for the survey so that you can understand that. The comparison again, and I'll look around the table because there may be some assistance that can be provided to me. I suspect not. So I made reference earlier that our sickness levels are double what they are in England and Wales. With regards to assaults, I sense from these numbers we're high, but let me find out for you. I'll give you a precise answer to where we sit nationally. Is that okay?
Yeah. It'd be good, Chief Con, obviously, to get a reflection in all the parts of the United Kingdom to see, if somebody assaults a police officer here, it's not acceptable. I know it's not acceptable, but is the perception it's acceptable? Well, if somebody assaults a police officer, if somebody assaults a police officer in Wales, is that acceptable or not acceptable? So are we soft-touch?
So I think it's a really helpful question for us to look at that. What I will say is there's a 9-point plan here that we deploy when officers are assaulted. And I think that's been out for quite a while, for a couple of years, but the 8th point in the plan is that the Chief Constable will provide a statement about the impact of that assault. And for some reason, which I still do not understand, that statement had not been part of the 9-point plan, even though it's out there publicly as part of the plan. No statement's been provided by Chief Constable. That statement is now being provided. When I say I don't understand the reasons why, I think Partners in Justice, the PPS, had issues with it. But when I was previously a Chief Constable, we introduced this, as did many, many, many other forces in the UK. This wasn't unique to me. And we provided the courts, and I went to see the judges and the magistrates to explain the impact of assaults on officers, because some of the personal stories were extremely impacting. So I think, and I know the Federation and Superintendent Association, as ever, will be in the room. I think this is an area where we have got to make sure, especially with the backdrop of what I've described about what this force is going through currently, this era of the PSNI, which we will come out of. I think it's important to show our officers and staff that we support them. But we will get you that detail, and I think that'd be helpful for us as well.
Okay, thank you, Kate. I'll go to Trevor on a question on pay rise. Pay awards.
John, I heard your comments. I'm reflecting back your comments in December where you were going to get this pay rise. So you have now got the money at 7%. If you contrast it, well, I suppose the first question is, when will the officers see in their pay packet? Secondly, and whilst there's an awful concentration on the officers, sometimes it feels like, and I'm not saying you would, but it feels like the civilian staff are left behind. Now, I know there is something in terms of an indication for them, but a question that many of them pose to me is, why are they not worth the same value as police officer, given they face different challenges than other public sector workers? So rather than the standard 5% that a public sector worker gets, will you support a higher rise for your civilian staff within the organisation? And when will they get it?
So on the first question, that's my question. When will they get it? Because the money has been, as I understand it, provided from the Assembly to Justice that's earmarked for us. Even though I've not been asked for a pay remit has been submitted by me, signed by me, requiring the 7%. I am speaking to the Minister this afternoon. And listen, the Minister's got all sorts of challenges, and, you know, I'm conscious that, you know, we are part of Justice, but we're a big part of the Justice budget. But the organisation should know, and I'm sure they do. I spoke out in a video last week. I will be relentless in making sure that 7% is landed. And the signs are positive because the money's been allocated to Justice that I believe covers that. But I can't answer your question about when they're going to get it because that all now sits with Justice. But I'm doing everything that we have needed to do to make sure that that transitions into cash in their pockets and in their wage packet. With regards to staff, listen, I completely agree. There is more of a parity in England and Wales around, as you'd be aware, around police staff and police officer pay. So effectively, in recent years, in recent history, they have mirrored, they've paralleled with regards to those in the police family. That's not the same here. I know the suggestion is now we're looking at the 5%, which obviously I'm extremely delighted about. You may also be aware that I'm very determined to get the REA, the allowance that police staff have here, taken up to an agreed amount of around about £1,000, which was agreed years ago and again never delivered. So that's built in to the budget gap for next year. I'm determined to do that. Would I support parity in the same way that we see it in England and Wales? Yes, I would. And I mentioned that to the pay review board chair yesterday about that, you know, difference. But again, that's for others. But certainly I would support that.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a small supplementary. You said in your opening remarks today, and I think the word you was that you didn't want to steal anyone else's thunder, and that was in terms of the budget. So clearly you have the money now in terms of securing. I believe in the resources we were told the money was there. So we're in March. I can't see at this point. I can't see at this point that the commitment to get the spend done is going to affect you for next year, given that and Mark gave us the very good news that you were going to have a balanced budget allowing for those pay raises. So the money's there. And reflecting back to your remarks at Christmas time about you were just going to do this. So I would really like you to outline today, when is this going to be in people's pay packets?
Trevor, if I could pay this money, I would have paid it immediately. Okay. I have to get that business case, that pay remit agreed by Justice. The questions you're asking me should be focused on the Minister. And as soon as that's agreed, that will be paid. And I do not expect any untoward delay from now. I know this has already probably gone on longer than we would have wanted it to from when the money was allocated in that first decision-making process, if you like, of the Assembly. But everything that we need to do has been done. And I'm waiting for the sign-off of that business case. As an accounting officer, I'd have to be very careful because you'll be ruling against me in the future because I will breach this accounting officer role if they don't do what they should do. I'm trying to play by the rules at the moment. But I'll bring Pamela in. Apparently I've covered it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Mark Durkan on a question on the Conova report, but it's particular about PPS decisions.
Thanks, Chief Constable. Thanks, Chair. This is related to, I suppose, a decision from last week as opposed to tomorrow's the publication of the report tomorrow. So, does the PSNI share Surrey and Livingston's obvious frustration at last week's PPS decision, basically that no one will be prosecuted for anything, and concur with his view that the evidence gathered collectively was a strong and compelling case?
So I can tell you now, I agree with Ian Livingston, and I will deal with all of this tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, well, save it
Okay,
to
well,
tomorrow. We'll have
okay.
a few supplementaries, but we'll get
Oh,
them on tomorrow
Yeah, I
as
think
well.
it's, yeah, that's wise. Okay, I'm gonna move to Edgar. Edgar's question on misconduct matters.
Yeah, Chief, we take a detailed report regularly from PSD on their work. And one of the recurring themes tends to be the kind of length of time it takes to get people processed through that, with obviously implications for their availability. But and I suppose the first question is really in terms of the staffing of PSD and its adequacy to deal with the caseload before it. The specific question is how many officers were dismissed from the PSMI in 2003 for gross misconduct? And what, in summary, was the nature of the offences which led to their dismissal?
So, because Chris, who is the Deputy Chief Constable, Chris Todd next to me to my left, is responsible for PSD, I'll hand to him. But just headline figures. I know there were 29 hearings last year in the calendar year, and 18 people were dismissed. But I'm gonna hand over the details to Chris, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so those are the headlines. 29 hearings in 2023, 18 dismissals. That's about 62% of cases that go to gross misconduct hearings result in dismissal. We have a lower level of process, which is called a meeting, but those most serious go to what we call hearings, which is gross misconduct. The first point about staffing, that is something which is constantly under review, but obviously the staff that sit within the professional standards department are from the broader service, so it's part of that consideration that we work through as a team around where our resources need to be. We have put staff in there from other departments over recent years to ensure that we can meet the demand, and we're satisfied that we're doing all we can to address the pressures that are within there. Notwithstanding, as every department would say, they want more staff, of course. But in terms of what we're seeing in those most serious cases, if you went back to 2021, I'd have told you that about 20% of the cases are related to driving under the influence, and about 20% relate to sexual offences, and about 14% of those would relate to drugs offences. In the last 12 months, 2023, you'll have seen a slight increase in driving under influence. You'll have seen an increase also in sexual offences. And some of this is as a result of the specific attention that we've been paying to offences related to violence against women and girls, and ensuring that the service is doing as much as it possibly can to address those issues. There's been less drugs offences, but there's also been an increase in data protection issues, use of WhatsApp groups, etc. So it might be worth highlighting at that point, because we have seen a slight increase in the number of offences relating to sexual offending, that you'll be conscious that the Angelini report was published last week. And this goes to that really. So we will focus on that with national policing, but I've already had a good look at the Angelini report and the impact that it has on the police service. The 16 recommendations in that report focus really on two areas. The first is around sexual offending, and particularly around the way in which police service investigates indecent exposure offences, and the extent to which that could be a precursor to more serious offending, and ensuring that it is treated as a serious offence in itself. The second area of the recommendations focus really on vetting and ensuring that the police service is doing all it can to vet its own staff and make sure that we're managing any risk within the service. So in terms of the second piece, we've done a lot of work around vetting already. We were in the process of refreshing our response to the vetting code, etc. We will look at the new recommendations which have just come out and work with the College of Policing to make sure that we do that in step with national policing. But last year we processed 2,445 vetting cases, and we rejected 78 of those. So we have a robust system in place, and it was a focus of the recent HMI inspection, which was favourable as well, but I identified some areas for improvement at the same time. In respect of the way we investigate indecent exposure, we we have a categorisation of offences which covers exposure and voyeurism. Actually, notwithstanding the comments of the Angelini report and the way in which policing addresses that, if you were to look at the outcomes in Northern Ireland, those offences which result in charge, those result in summons, those that are dealt with by out of court disposals, but ultimately the offenders are dealt with in a positive way in terms of outcomes there, you would see that our outcome rate is almost twice that you would see across England and Wales. So I think we're in a strong position about the seriousness that we afford to investigations of that type, and I hope the board will be assured by that as well.
The HMIC reported positively on your vetting procedures.
Yes, but room for improvement. So yeah, we're along, but we've got more to do before we reach outstanding, of course, which would always be where we would want to be. But certainly, it was a favourable report.
Okay, thank you. A supplement from Linda on this.
Just given the programme on the Sarah Everard case the other night and the fact that there was a big recruitment drive in England without, I think, any real difference has been made to how you would recruit and how you would sift out those that might be liable to carry out sexual offences. Can you give us some assurances that before our new recruitment drive starts, that we have done all we can do and everything that is humanly possible to ensure that people who are liable to carry out these offences don't get into the PSNI in the first place, particularly given all the challenges that we have in getting them out when they do get in?
Yes, thanks, Linda. So yes, that really comes down to the vetting. So the vetting process of those recruits is something that we will be looking at. We've revisited the code already. That was a piece of work that was in progress, and will be applied in our vetting. But there are some new recommendations within the Angelini report, and we'll need to look at those. Some of those will be more challenging in Northern Ireland than others, such as the recommendation around home visits. There's particular nuances that we'll have to look at, but we will work with national policing around that, and we will look to any way to step up the standards of vetting if at all we can. But what we have seen through investigations that we've conducted internally, so we've reviewed all of our misconduct investigations. We were intending to report at the end of the financial year on the outcome of that. That's sort of a retrospective look to make sure we haven't missed anything within our misconduct investigations, in particular relating to sexual offending. So I'll be able to bring that report back in about a month or so's time. But that's looking very positive as well. And as I say, we're satisfied from the number of vetting applications that we do reject, that there is a robust process there it does challenge those people that want to join the service, and rightly so. But any room for improvement, we will always be looking for that. But I will give that assurance that we will only be taking the best recruits into Garnerville.
Thank you. Chris, can I just ask a tiny supplementary to that? You talked earlier on about some of the crimes being dealt with by disposals. Would they be detected under the current vetting?
Yes, they would. And one of the pieces of work that has been done nationally actually is to look back across the Police National Database, which is a system that all police services across the UK feed into, to make sure that those people who are currently in the service have not got any offences against them that have been missed through that process. So a kind of a retrospective look. We did that for the whole of the police service of Northern Ireland. There was only one instance where something was identified, and that was for somebody who had transferred from another service. It had been disclosed. It was a minor issue. It was not an arrestable offence or anything of that nature. It was a fixed penalty notice for something completely trivial. Had been disclosed, but because they'd come from another service, it had been dealt with a long time ago in their past, so to speak.
Okay, fine, thank you. I'm going to go to Gerry, and it's a question on PII applications in the Sean Brown case.
Thank you. As you know, Chief Constable, you'll be aware that the Sean Brown inquest until his murder in 1987 was brought to a close by the coroner last week on the basis of what was in PPIs. I was at the at the court, and it's file 11, I think it was 56 redacted pages, and then another file was 15 fully redacted, I mean completely black. I think I'm right in that before this happened, going back a wee while, that you had made a comment around that you would support a public inquiry. And I just wanted to bring you back to that and ask you, do you stand over that? In fact, also, due to the conversation we had earlier on, excuse me, that if there is full cooperation by the PSNI, that it is on the basis of it's done in a timely fashion because of the delays we've seen in the past.
So firstly, I want to say with regards to the Brown family, this isn't just words that often people portray. I am genuinely disappointed for them around the inquest. We know that inquests can work well for some families in legacy cases. We know that, but for other families, because of the public interest immunity mechanism and the lack of a framework at inquest to deal with sensitive material, that for other families, the inquest is not the route for the families to get the information. But again, for me, and obviously legacy is something very close to my heart, this is again us, the establishment, the institutions failing those families. So my heart goes out to the Brown family, and I want to make very clear that Mr. Brown was a man who'd never done any wrong. He was an innocent member of the public going about his lawful business, a decent law-abiding man who was murdered by terrorist thugs. Any information that we have, those redacted pages through the PII process, this is where the system doesn't work for some families at inquests. And I'm looking at ways that I can address this after the date that all these inquests conclude. There are other inquests that I hope will finish. So there are 3 categories of inquests: those that will finish, those that won't finish because they'll simply run out of time by the 1st of May, and those such as the Sean Brown inquest that will not be able to be concluded because of the lack of a process to deal with the PII material. I've already had provisional discussions with Sir Declan Morgan around addressing this issue for families where there will be unfettered access to that information, unredacted access to everything to Sir Declan Morgan. But I'm also looking at other ways that I can address what I think we can do more at with regards to that sensitive material in those cases. So yeah, to assure you, I do support public inquiry. If there was any such inquiry set up, the PSNI would absolutely cooperate with that inquiry and would provide that inquiry with all of the information. And as again, I'll use the term unfettered access to absolutely everything that we have collected with regards to the Sean Brown case. That includes all of those files that were redacted. They will get those unredacted files.
Just thank you for that. And as you said, the family were very distressed in that, and I think that would be helpful news to them.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerry. And a question, I think the last question from Trevor on people participating in parades, unauthorised parades.
Chief, you'll understand there have been perceptions in terms of your own organisation of 2-tier policing. And now I suppose it's creeping into, there's whether it be parades, rallies, protests, whatever. I mean, there's the high profile one in Londonderry where a politician seems to be is not going to face any charge in relation to that. Now, whether that's a PPS issue or otherwise, that's for them to answer. But is it true, going by your reports, that you apologised to Colm Eastwood in relation to that case? And if so, do you apologise to all victims who are brought forward for statements or who are brought forward in terms of prosecutions?
So I can't speak for the decision from the PPS, and I'll be very careful how I couch this. I had a conversation with Colm Eastwood around the delays that he faced at the police station. I'll be very clear on that. That was a private conversation because he had been delayed from being interviewed at the police station. Then obviously there was something of a circus outside with regards to the media. And I will always step in and speak to people about that. I'm not going to speak about the remaining of that conversation, but I apologise for the delay of him not being interviewed. I'm going to leave that question there. Although I'll bring Bobby in around parades, whether Bobby wants to say anything about how we deal with issues so that we are fair to everybody. Before he does, I will say this. People will always try, I think, here, and I'll always call things out, to use the PSNI as a bit of a football. The men and women in this organisation have a really difficult job, and we try to do everything in a fair and equitable and sensible way. And every case has to be dealt with on its own merits. And sometimes nobody will walk in the shoes of the police officers making these decisions. And where pragmatism can happen, pragmatism should happen. But if you do one thing, another side will say you didn't do that for us. Well, each case is different, nothing exactly the same. And I just want the board to be aware of just the difficult decisions that our staff have to make every day. And it's not to keep people happy, it's to apply the law or to apply the regulations.
Before Bobby comes in, I suppose, and that's useful in terms of the clarity of what the nature of the policy was. But to address that whole issue of two-tier policing, when the narrative is out there and people doesn't know what the nature of that is, it allows them to come to their own conclusions of the nature. It's been useful for you to highlight the nature of the policy as opposed to what others may perceive, given that it's been there's a public narrative around that.
I'll just come back on that if I can, Chair. I know you're conscious of time. Listen, there is this two-tier policing. It's quite funny, these bylines, and two-tier police, there's two-tier this, there's two-tier that. Everybody seems to interpret it in a different way. There isn't any two-tier policing. We will deal with everything equality. This is the most human rights focused policing organisation in the United Kingdom, and I would say de facto possibly the world. Everybody should look at the PS9 and how these officers are trained and what they do with pride. There is no two-tier policing in the PSNI.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And maybe just to build on that, I mean, obviously the Public Processions Act creates clear statutory obligations for the police. And what I can say that is, in terms of how we go about applying that statutory obligation, we do so consistently, fairly and impartially, and we're appropriate as well with sensitivity. You know, for what it's worth, I think in general terms, parading is, relatively speaking, much less of an issue for us as a society. And while sections of our society may still take issue with that legislation, it's my view that that legislation has been key in terms of contributing to a significant improvement in terms of the community tensions around this issue.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, you had a supplemental for that, I think?
Yes.
The last question.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ian. It's lovely to meet you, Chief Constable. This is my first meeting. Just on the back of Trevor's question, I know a number of people within Northern Ireland have received PPS letters in relation to protest parades, particularly around the protocol situation. A number of these people that have received them were known to the police, but in particular in terms of community involvement in a positive way. You know, how do you balance that in terms of the right to protest around that time, and in terms of the police confidence in those areas that has been damaged? And there's been particularly good work done in terms of Bobby Singleton and the work that has been done in those areas, but this has damaged this to some degree.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay.
So I think maybe this is an off-table discussion. All I can say is it sort of reiterates what Bobby has said. And, you know, sometimes the elephant in the room here, the media sees on things, politicians sees on things. And the people are in the middle of all this, almost trying to referee things. And it, to a certain extent, I suppose the PPS as well, but it's the police officers, it's the superintendent who's on duty that afternoon, or it's the inspector, or it's the sergeant, or it's even the constable when something spontaneously happens. And they're put in quite difficult positions, sometimes deliberately, and by all sides. And then we'll get a report from somebody because they've seen something on social media. And I just think with a lot of this, we've got to demonstrate, obviously, consistency, common sense. We've got to make sure that the circumstances of everything is taken into consideration, because there will be occasions where it just doesn't make any sense to take any action other than to almost give a warning around how people have behaved, because it's not helpful to anyone. But all I'd say to you is, look, these are difficult cases. I think I agree with Bobby. I met with those that authorise parades, and the number of parades that are, what we described as high risk have come down considerably. We are a million miles from where we used to be, thank goodness, with regards to these issues. The legislation and the Parades Commission, it's all been really helpful towards resolving this, but we still have residual issues, which I recognise. And some people always make mischief, but I suppose I just appeal to people not to make mischief. And of course, where there are genuine parades, where people have got, a reason to want to remember or celebrate an issue, we should allow them to do that within the rule of the law and peacefully, and ensure they're allowed to do that, to respect their cultural background. So it is, none of this is very straightforward, but I think we're in a good place. Overall, I think but we'll still have odd occasions where there'll be concerns. But what I can promise you, we'll always act with honesty around trying to deliver something that's fair and equitable to everybody. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Chief Constable, thanks to you and your team for taking questions today. Very much appreciated. From my thanks, I suppose this is my last formal meeting of the board before I leave at the end of the month. And I want to say a genuine thank you to all my board member colleagues around the room, and to the Chief Executive and our staff for all their support, and to all the people who work and engage with the board, including all the many volunteers, the custody visitors, the community observers, without whom we could not successfully perform our role. Theodore Roosevelt, who, as you know, was the first American to win a Nobel Peace Prize, said, far and away the best prize, I'm written this down because I'm not going to remember it, far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. And I passionately believe in the work of the board, as did my mother, who was one of the first members on the board all those years ago. Policing has been the backbone of our peace process, and we can't forget that. There's always been challenging issues to deal with, as policing does not stand still, and this is why the board's oversight role and work remains work worth doing. To you, Chief Constable, and all the officers and staff within the police service for all that you do on our behalf, on day in, day out, and daily to keep us safe. I have genuinely been moved by the professionalism, courage, and dedication.